Now I wanna, cause I mean, we know each other through UCB, so I
Yeah.
kind of want to be a nerd about improv stuff for a while and just
Go ahead.
that history for a while. So I know like the basic bullet points of, I'm for any, just to be clear about this, for any UCB people here, I'm probably historically one of the biggest nerds about improv stuff and improv history. So I wanted to just pick your brain, because my
And
understanding.
you just made an improv movie.
I
about
did.
improv.
Mike Birbiglia made
Mike
it, and I
Birbiglia.
acted in it.
Yes,
The great
sorry.
Mike Birbiglia. Comes out July 22nd. Don't think twice. No, but because I remember one of the early things, because at this point, UCB is like, it has changed comedy. It on two coasts now. New York, like long form
and LA.
improv didn't exist. And now LA, there's like a literal facility with like valet parking.
That is ridiculous.
You never signed up for that.
No,
What
no.
did you think was going to happen when
That
you guys...
one made me, when the LA theater opened, it's basically like a mini junior college. It's ridiculous.
Crazy. Like, it's accredited. It's an accredited
Yeah, we sell
school.
like turnovers.
Like,
We sell like pastry. Like, that's so weird.
like
You know,
the
going from the 22nd Street theater that was like an old strip club, and the refrigerator in the box office used to have like 30 dildos.
so many dildos in that fridge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Left over from our sketch show. We had a sketch that had a lot of dildos, and somebody thought it'd be funny to keep them, and for some reason they were in the refrigerator.
Yeah.
Does that preserve their life? I'm not sure.
Now, when you're in Chicago, this is pre-1996, my understanding, because I always heard, because UCB, I always thought one of the secrets to what made the theater work was that you and Amy and Ian and Matt, the other founders of the theater, like you all are pretty different people in many ways. And I always felt like you could feel the four of you guys. Like I felt like as a kid and as a student, it was always like Besser's like hardline, you don't want to, like you want to impress him, you don't want him mad. Amy's this like force of nature, and how does she do what she does? Ian's the machine, that's his actual nickname.
Yeah, the
But then
machine.
you were like one of the most important people to the early days of the UCB, because you were the guy who would actually like talk to us and was fun. You were the member of UCB that was like actually down to just like have fun and hang out. So I want to know, like, when you were in Chicago and you guys were planning this move to New York to
Yes.
like build this sketch show and eventually this theater, like what were your goals? Like that's a
The
huge
goal when we left Chicago for New York was to get a TV show. And we decided that New York sustained theater, like LA is a showcase town, like you go there and you do a showcase and you fly back to Chicago. But LA you could build, or excuse me, New York you could build a following and get a run going, and that was our goal. So we had like literally a moving van of props that we drove out in like 3 shows, and we just hit the ground running, and the goal was to garner a following and attention. And then the improv show connected with people who had never seen long form, and we were basically taking what we had learned in Chicago and did it here. So we did this free show, which became a small sensation, and from that, people wanted to learn how to, we never had the intention of opening a theater, is what my point. And cut to 2 years after we landed, we had so many students, and those students had done shows that we directed, all 4 of us directed, that we were basically programming this little theater on 17th Street. So we said, why don't we have our own clubhouse? And I think Besser found this strip club that was shut down.
That, like, even that is such a different New York, that you could just find an abandoned strip club.
Yeah.
And be like, hey, let's start a business. And the city would be like, right on, man. Like, that doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah, you're right. It was, I think Giuliani shut it down for code of whatever, some code.
I think the code was we shouldn't have a house of prostitution
Yes,
on 22nd
it was
Street.
cleaning up the city, yes.
Because we all I later...
It was probably a house of prostitution upstairs.
We found out because it was shut down because the fire escape just ran from one of the apartments downstairs into the theater. And then I forget who found it. Someone read that the scam with this old strip club used to be that you would literally climb up the fire escape with a stripper into that apartment, and
Yes.
it was like an actual brothel.
Yes.
And I believe you lived in that apartment for a
I
while.
did not.
Or you lived in the one
I
above
lived
it.
above the brothel.
Yeah.
I lived above the brothel, and then I got a better apartment on top of that, so I had the top floor.
So
So
you
I was
literally-
further away from the brothel as my success went.
That's amazing. So you
But yes, it was shady things going on upstairs.
Big time.
Big time.
And when you started the theater, which was kind of like accidental, or not accidental, but sort of incidental to what you guys came to New York for.
Yeah.
You came for one reason and then
Yeah.
kind of slid backwards into that. At what point did you realize the theater was becoming, like, I feel like it's like the modern version of like Second City. It's like the modern version of the Groundlings. These like troops come along every couple decades that just like put a new stamp on things and totally shift how comedic talent is found. Like, at what point did you realize, like, oh, we accidentally made this thing that's become kind of a force?
I don't know if there was ever like a specific moment, but I remember when we had so many classes and we started to codify the curriculum, it felt very grown up, like, oh, wow. Because in the beginning, it was just me, Matt, and Amy, and I could teach my take on improv, and Besser could teach his, and Ian could teach his, and Amy could teach his, and they were different. I mean, we all had the same principles in mind, but we were all sort of teaching our take on it. But then once we started to codify, like, people need to have, because other people were teaching, people need to have the same skill set when they go from level 1 to level 2. Once we started organizing that, then that felt pretty grown up. I don't know if I felt like, oh, Second City, but I guess like the success of people coming out of the theater,
Yes.
and then articles getting written about it, then I probably realized that, oh, I guess we are like the next phase in the improv comedy movement for now. You know, there'll be another one, I'm sure.
Because if I remember correctly, I remember when Andy Daly got Mad TV.
Yeah.
And if I remember right, they shut down the theater that night and held a party because someone got a job.
Yeah. It was like our victory. We were all so happy. That was the attitude. Yes.
I remember being like, I don't think people would buy it if they just showed up now. But the UCB, like when I found it, I was 20 years old. I was miserably depressed, felt like an outcast in all areas of my life, and showed up and was like, what is this fucking island of misfit toys?
How did you stumble into it?
Straight up, this is true. I was doing short form improv at college, wanted to keep doing it in the summer because it was like the only thing that was making me happy was comedy. Sent away, I was like Googling, or at that point it was probably like Yahoo, Alta Vista-ing, and I found out about Chicago City Limits because that was like the big dog in New York before UCB. Sent away for them and they sent me this brochure. It was like this real fancy brochure that laid out all the info. And then I found the UCB website, which was the most
terrible,
poorly organized website I've ever seen. It was just a series of squares that weren't
There was a time
marked.
when I was in charge of the website.
It was insane.
And it was Dynamo, but I would have meetings with Dynamo and Chad Carter, who are two brilliant people, and I was trying to manage that, which is why it was terrible.
But it was just these squares, and it didn't say what they were, and some of them were links and some of them weren't. So you had to hover over them. And then when I finally found the one that said classes, you clicked on it, and the description, I'll never forget this, was, we will teach you guerrilla fighting techniques and spit takes. And that was all it said about what the classes were. And then I called up, and I was like, I'd love some info, and gave somebody my address, and you guys sent me nothing. Chicago City Limits, I had a brochure like 36 hours later, and for some reason I was like, these guys don't have the time for me, man. This is the place to be.
Oh, it made you want it more.
I was just like, this place is cool. Like, this place does not need me.
Yeah.
This other place feels like they do. And then I used to send in a $25 deposit check, and I sent it in, and then John Bowie called me and was like, oh, we don't have room in classes for you. And I was like, oh, when's the next one? And back then, now anybody knows UCB knows, like, level 1 classes go up, and it's like 45 seconds later, they're sold out, and then the next, it's just constant. They were like, there's no new classes until like November, and it was in June. It was like, oh, we don't have enough demand to have another class for 6 months. And I was like, oh, I'll be back in school. That sucks. I won't be able to do it till next year. And then I actually said to John, I was like, are you the guy from the band Egghead? Because he was a punk rocker.
Oh, wow.
And he was like, you know my band? And I was like, yeah, I have your 7-inch. I read the fanzine you guys put out. It's great. I saw you guys when I was 15 in New Jersey. And he was like, all right, man, your class starts Sunday. But it's crazy. It makes my head spin, and I wasn't there. I started in 2000, so I started 4 years after you guys really got the ball rolling. Does it spin your head to realize, like, to think about what do you pine for when you think of the old days? What are the stories that stand out to you from solo arts?
Well, because I lived upstairs above the theater, I was really immersed in that culture. It was almost like the dean of students was living upstairs. And so I would see everybody often. And I remember like going down into the theater and seeing Delaney giving people haircuts at 2 a.m. Like Mike is a great improviser and he's a teacher and super funny, but it was like, I'd hear music because I was upstairs. I'm like, what's going on? And I would go downstairs and somebody was using the theater to give a haircut. So like stuff like that. What do I remember? I just remember I had a giant dog that lived with us. And
Do you remember? I think I told you about this. My mom. Do you remember the story I told you about this? One of the first interactions I ever had with you. I was interning. I was 21 years old, and no, I had a show, and I was trying to convince my parents to come in from Jersey because I was like, I love this place. I love this thing. And they came to the show. And the old theater, the waiting room was just this narrow hall.
Yes.
Like when they shut it down for fire codes, we were all really sad and upset. But then like, as soon as we found a new theater, I think everybody was like, oh yeah, it was a death trap. It was a real,
But it was an operating, it was a business beforehand.
Yeah, it was. But I was
ahead.
waiting in the lobby and I went out to check on my mom. And I was like, how are you? And she was like, I'm very upset. And I was like, why? And she was like, because that big shot brought his gigantic dog and he's smoking a cigar in this lobby with all these people. And she pointed to you and I was like, Mom, that's one of the guys who owns the place. And she goes, well, he's sure acting like
I was
it.
not
But here's my favorite thing.
I was smoking a cigar indoors?
Chewing on a cigar or something.
Chewing on a cigar. I would never smoke a cigar indoors.
But here's my favorite thing about that story was many years later, when I worked at the UCB school for many years. I actually worked on those curriculums when you talked about them. But I told you that story when we had become when I was not this kid who was in awe of everything. And I'll never forget, you said your mom was right. I'm on the side of your mom. And it made me realize Walsh is the best guy. He was like, yeah, you know what? Your mom was put upon that evening and it shouldn't have happened. And it was super genuine and sweet. But that used to happen. People used to have some of the stuff that happened there were actual crazy people around.
There were. I remember in the early days, because the strip club for some reason had a real connection with the Orthodox Jewish community. For real.
Hasidic community.
The brothel or whatever was happening there. There was gentlemen who frequented that place. And for a couple years later, these guys would come in traditional garb and they would come to the box office and they go, show? And oh, these are the kind of shows. And oh, it's not that. And we're no, the business is gone. And they would fake, look at a brochure and oh, okay.
And
I'll be back.
I also remember Fleet Week every year.
Yes.
Was just drunk sailors stumbling in fuck.
Yeah, they were so
Improv.
So bummed out.
They were just I gotta watch Improv. What?
Yeah, and I remember all the New Year's Eve parties we used to have. Oh. Those were crazy, fun, and lots of craziness. I miss those. I remember the trap door.
Oh,
there was the basement was crazy scary.
Dirt floor.
And that's where teams would rehearse. There was almost on a submarine. There was a hole in the box office that was this narrow, and you would go down this ladder, and then you'd rehearse this. The ceiling was like that, or there was a big trap door outside that would lift up, and that was people would fall in because it was so dangerous. They just cut a hole in the floor and put a hinge on it. So the impromptu nature of the theater was. I'm very nostalgic for that because it was just literally we cut the stripper runway in half, knocked out all the mirrors,
and I wasn't there for that.
Took the pole down and then pushed the two pieces together and made a stage.
I heard that was a truly everyone. Oh. I got involved about a year after that, I think 6 months after that. But everyone who was part of the theater who helped physically reshape the space says it was one of the most unsanitary weeks of their lives.
Yes. And there was all these stuffed chairs that would be in a library or a rich study in there, but they'd been used many times, and they went right in the trash. It was awful.
Yeah.
It was, and there was a big picture of the woman who owned it, who was our landlord, and it was she was dressed like Mae West in stockings, and there was a big picture like that in there. It was crazy.
So I think one of my big questions is why do you think it went from that to what it is today? How does that happen?
I think we had the good fortune of bringing something to New York that didn't exist, which was long form Chicago-style improv. And then I think we did due diligence on our curriculum. We found really talented people who then became teachers, obviously. So we lucked into talented people who wanted to teach, and we had a good curriculum. And then I think, I think it was the void. Literally, if you were in UCB in 98 or 99 or 2000s, Andy Daly's or Riggle or Paul Scheer, you could be on stage 6 nights a week and just work your chops and get better and do shows, Billy Merritt, all these people. And so I think their passion for it, they got better, and then word got out. You know, ASCAT was sort of the cornerstone, the Sunday night show. So as word spread, I think we lucked into a void, quite honestly. And the friends we had were, when we landed in New York, we had friends who were writers at Conan, writers at SNL, and then we did Luna, and, you know, we befriended people like Janine and the State guys. So the friends we made came to our little clubhouse, and I think it was a ripple effect. So,
I remember, like, Louis used to run, like a workout show there.
Yeah.
And no one even remembers that. Just like he had, like, a weekly show to just try shit.
Yeah.
It's
yeah.
crazy.
Todd
Barry
Barry.
did Icky.
Yeah.
Some great shows.
And he did a show with John Groff.
Yeah.
He's the Blackish head writer now, called Sidecar.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's, we're like old men in the old folks' home.
They are. But I did want to talk about the modern day, because it is now, it's like a professional place. And it's like still the best. But I wanted to ask you, like, based on the fact that UCB now has this history, and I think a real legacy, I think people now show up, first of all, in droves compared to how they used to, and also sometimes with agendas. Like, I think because of the work that the UCB did, now, I mean, I remember when I showed up in 2000, I had been doing improv in college, and that was kind of like, not a rarity, but not a common, people were like, oh, you did short form in college, like, okay, you're a little ahead of the curve. Now, there's kids who have done it for 4 years and then trained in their home cities for 3 more years.
My son, who is 7, took his first improv class in Los Angeles today.
Really?
And I don't want him to take improv. I don't, because I think when you take it at a young age, because your job as a teacher when a 7-year-old up to like 14 years old is just really to give love to that person and let them learn to express themselves. Because like improv came out of, like, say, Viola Spolin, and she took these games into working class poor neighborhoods, and these kids with, you know, terrible lives, at least they could express it in a safe environment. And it was simple because there's no props or anything. And so, like, your job in an early stages improv classes, I think, is just to, like, support their choices and let them express themselves. So you're constantly, whatever they do, like, oh, that was amazing, you're so good, you're so worthwhile. So you're just being reinforced for anything. So by the time, this is my fear, by the time you're 14, you could be the worst improviser in the world, and you're constantly hearing you're amazing and great. So I think it ingrains bad habits.
So you want him to, like...
but I'm not going to stop him.
Yeah.
But, because my wife signed him up, and because when he told me, he's like, Dad, I want to do improv. I'm like,
where is he doing it?
Okay. There's a little theater on Ventura in the Valley, and I hear it's good, like, it's very supportive.
Must be weird for you and them to know. I mean,
I don't think they know that he's my son.
You've literally co-written a book on how to do improv.
Yeah.
And you're dropping them off at some theater in Ventura.
Yes. Well, my wife today did it, so
that's awesome.
I'll let you know how it is. But it's improv has spread. I went off on a tangent about how I don't think young people should do improv. I think because if you're going to be a professional with it, which is what I hope he could do, is that you can start later when you have a wealth of life experience.
When you're ready to get yelled
and
at,
also
too.
people can be
You want him to you want him to take like an Owen Burke class.
An Owen Burke or a Besser class, but not at 7.
No, not at 7. These
Delane.
are teachers who it was legendary. Like, you walk into the gauntlet when you walk into. You're gonna know if you're good.
Yeah.
And even if you are good, that's not what we're focusing on now. We're focusing on what you can be better at.
Yes.
My question, to loop it back around, is for current day UCB students, like, when you think about the theater you helped found now, like, what do you think is the realistic experience that a student can expect? What's the ideal? Because people now show up with agendas. They see that Bobby Moynihan came out of there. They see that Zach Woods and Adam Pally, Ben Schwartz. They know Ellie Kemper came out of there.
Well, one thing I know still is I would say 50% of the people in class, on a general class, have no aspiration still of pursuing comedy as a career. But I think
in LA?
Even in LA, I think.
Wow.
Yeah, I think so. But there are people who are uber focused, and that's okay. And I think in some ways, because it's bigger, it is a little more corporate. Like, there's not like craziness happening as much. But I guess my hope for somebody who finds improv is, one, because there are, there's in LA we have 4 stages, and then we have a digital thing where they can make videos. So hopefully there's plenty of room for talented people to rise and get to do shows and not worry about the stakes or where it's going to happen. And also, it's like, I always say this, is that when I took my first improv class 3 weeks in, and maybe 4 weeks or maybe 5 weeks in, I finally did my first good scene. And it was like a drug. It was like a crack hit. It was like, this I want to do for the rest of my life. So regardless of the way it's changed, I still think anybody who has that predisposition to, like you did, looking for something to make them happy, or looking for something like, I don't know where this is leading, but I'm going to do whatever I can to do this 6 nights a week, we still do that. Like, we still provide that drug to anybody who might be predisposed. It is more complicated now because we're a bigger corporation, quite frankly. So it's not as like old-timey nostalgic, and there's not as much insanity, but I think there's still that experience where, you know, you can like learn this thing, and if you like that thing, you can do it forever, and there's room for you to get on stage or make videos. That's my hope for anybody who jumps into the community.
Yeah.
And it's also, it's not the point of it, but so many people like meet friends for life, and like there's people who have been performing for 20 years now, and they still come in once a week and do their show with their 45-year-old friends. I think that's awesome. Like, and there's no benefit to it, believe me. Like, there's no agent seeing the 45-year-old people trying to discover them.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
I
So
do.
That still goes on.
Oh, the idea that an agent isn't looking to discover you? Yes, I know that feeling. Yes.
And I'm 51, and I do ASCAT probably once a month now, and I'm by far the oldest person in the room.
Yeah.
Always.
Yeah.
But I still love doing it, and my friends still do it, so
Yeah.
I like that about the theater.
Now, you mentioned that things weren't or they're not like as insane as they used to be, which is just a byproduct of like growing and figuring out what you're doing. But I do want to talk about that, because I always got the sense that in the early days, you really were, out of the 4 UCB people, I think the one that maybe just brought the most sheer insanity. And like, I remember that show you did that took place in a mental hospital.
Yep, the
Robot TV.
Robot TV.
You did some things that
Robot TV was a show for robots who were high. So we would imagine the audience was robots who were high, which is insane.
I can say, having seen it, like a performance art level of bizarre at times.
Yeah.
Now, what was it that like made that? Because you also did a lot of stuff at the Annoyance Theater.
I did.
Before, and that's, I feel like, a thing I've never had a chance to talk with you about. And that was always known. That was like a fringe weirdo collective in Chicago, right?
Yes.
And so what was going on in Chicago between Annoyance, between like the UCB shows in Chicago? I don't think people realize, like, a lot of those shows took place at like 2 p.m. on a street corner.
Yeah.
Like, what was the stuff going on with you guys in Chicago, and you in particular, that you brought to New York and realized? Because I felt like for you, I look back at it now and realize when you showed up and had this sort of like chaotic desire to stage these bizarre shows, and then you're finding people in New York who are real misfits that have not been granted that before. It must have been like a playground for you.
It was.
Kilgore, the Halloween show was your show?
Kilgore, we did that. The bloody Halloween musical.
Every year, I mean, Kilgore, that show, if anybody ever saw it, they would paint the stage white every year. And when I say hundreds of gallons of blood would be all over the place by the end, I am underselling how much blood you put in that show.
And it was a bummer, like in November, there'd still be like blood on the carpet, because it gets everywhere.
And it was all made out of chocolate syrup, so it just smelled like shit for months.
Yes, and roaches love chocolate syrup, so there'd be a roach infestation.
So what was your, like,
There you go.
from the, especially in 22nd Street.
Yeah.
What was going on in Chicago before you came to New York that made, like, what was your drive? And this is not the type of thing you think about when you're in it as a young man, but looking back, like, do you feel like were you pursuing some specific voice that you
I
kept
think,
finding?
like you, I found something that made me happy, which was improv. Like, I was pursuing psychology. I thought I was going to be a psychologist, and that was not going to happen. I was too difficult to be that responsible and smart about pathology. It's very difficult, and I was exposed to like teenagers who were suicidal, and I did that for a couple years. So the minute I stumbled into like improv in places
I've never
like,
heard that before.
Yeah.
So you went from working with suicidal teens, and then all of a sudden you were like, oh, thank
well,
God.
no, at night.
This other thing, thank
No,
God.
at night, I'd already taken my first improv class in college, so at night I would do like sketch shows and improv, but during the day I had a real job, and I was still holding on to that dream. Like, I was taking some postgraduate stuff and thinking like, this is kind of a hobby. I didn't think it was going to go anywhere. Yeah. But when I got into places like The Annoyance, what I learned from that process is they would do like 3 to 5 months rehearsal, improvising, and then from that you would form a show. And so it was kind of like writing a show through improv, and that's kind of what I did with some of the shows I did at UCB, like The Adler or The Most Special Place on the Planet or whatever. And those were like, I liked teaching that to other people because it's a really fun process to create characters through improv. And it actually helped with Veep because Veep was really loose in the beginning and you could sort of offer suggestions and improvise traits that the writers liked. And so, but in Chicago, it was more about, and then Improv Olympic was about straight up like Harold and long form. And so I had my foot in many theaters. And then UCB, I was doing in the early 90s, we were doing like you said, like premise shows where it was like a new sport, or it was like a show outdoors at 2 in the afternoon, or a fake, protest outside of Wrigley Field. So there was all these different things happening. And then I guess like in 94 is when like me, Matt, and Ian just codified like this is what we're gonna do.
Yeah.
And we got focused. So,
And
but Chicago had many different sort of strains of improv when I was coming up.
And I've never talked to any of you guys about this, but I get the sense, there must have been like a big chip on your shoulder in a way if you guys were like, we're gonna do all this crazy shit, make a lot of noise, and then move somewhere else and do it ourselves outside.
Well, we had the
anyone else in
classic, like Ian, Amy, and I were touring with Second City at the time. I think we toured for a year, and it was like, that was my first comedy, like full-time job, and I never had to have I was so happy to tour, but you were touring old scenes that were really funny when they were created, but they felt a little stale.
But like I've never done that, but I hear some of those scenes they make you do in Turco are literally from the 1950s.
Yes.
That sucks.
And so there was like, there was the freedom, like UCB was, you could do anything you wanted. But I think in like 96 or 95, we went into the artistic director and told him that we were gonna move to New York and we're gonna try to get our own sketch show. And he was like, you're making a huge mistake. It never works out. I can't tell you how many people come in here and have faith that it's gonna work out. You're making a huge mistake, because Second City back then, I haven't been there in a while, was like, there was a huge line and there was like a pecking order. Like you did Turco, then you did ETC, and then you got on main stage. So there was a lot of waiting around and nobody wanted to do that. It
so you guys, they were like, you're making a huge mistake, and you guys were just like, all right, we'll see you later.
And then, And we had like a 6-month commitment. The four of us was like, we'll give it 6 months, like see what happens. And then
in New York?
Yeah.
That was all you committed to, was 6 months?
Yeah, like literally we knew that we would.
I've never heard that.
Yeah, we would not turn anything. We would turn, auditions down to focus on the group, and we weren't going to go back. Like we were going to go for 6 months. So in the beginning, like nobody knew how long it was going to last.
Yeah.
But we committed 100%. It wasn't like I had a flight booked back in June. We were definitely committed.
Yeah.
And fortunately, we had incremental success right away. We had people know us, and we got booked in the bigger shows in town, and people started to come see us, and we discovered solo arts, and so it was incremental success. Yeah.
I think one of the things that I found is from the first day I was ever at UCB, and I think until now, you guys built a place that never had an attitude to shut people down. Like, I don't think there's ever been moments where people are like, at UCB, I don't think it's ever said, taking a risk is a mistake. I don't think that gets said like it was said to you guys. And I think that's really, like, I'll never forget when I was, I showed up, I don't know if you even remember me, I was like a 20-year-old kid with a bowl haircut, and I was like sickeningly pale and had giant glasses, but people were like, oh, you're funny and you work hard. Come hang out.
Yeah.
And I'd like go drinking at bars when I was 20 years old with like guys in their 40s, and we'd just be like, oh, that one scene in class was really weird. And it's always been a place where it's like, if you work hard and you are funny, you have a place here. And I think that's still true.
I think that is still true. I would hope so. I mean, I'm not coming through the program.
Yeah.
But I think that is true.